He won the Ultimate Fighter. He had the looks, the skills, the UFC push. But then, he walked away. Not broken, not broke, just gone. MMA is a sport where legends fight past their expiration dates and icons beg for one last shot. And in a sport like that, Mac Danzig did the one thing no one expects from a fighter. He left while he could still recognize himself in the mirror. This is the story of the fighter who figured out the game before it destroyed him. It's about a guy who saw the fire coming and stepped away before it consumed him. And the truth is, the UFC never forgave him for it. Because if more fighters had followed his lead, the whole system would collapse. Mac Danzig grew up surrounded by contradictions. Born in Cleveland, raised just outside of Pittsburgh, the industrial Rust Belt where men measured worth in grit and blood. But Mac didn't quite fit that mold. He was a punk kid with straight-edge ethics, no interest in drinking, partying, or being part of the herd. While other kids listened to hip-hop or pop, Mac was blasting Minor Threat and Bad Brains. He wasn't just into punk music, he lived it. The anti-authority, the do-it-yourself ethos, the clean body, clean mind, no compromise lifestyle. By his early 20s, he had already made another rare decision in combat sports. He became a vegan.
Hi, I'm Mac Danzig for PETA.
Am I a better fighter as a vegan? I think my record speaks for itself. I won 12 fights straight after I became vegan.
I just don't understand how anybody can have an animal in their lives that they've ever cared about and know that this is going on. You don't need any kind of animal products to be an athlete in this day and age. I'm Mac Danzig, and I'm a vegan.
Not a trendy lifestyle choice, as this was before Whole Foods sold oat milk. This was ethical, spiritual. No meat, no dairy, no exploitation of animals, period. And yet he also wanted to fight. Not metaphorically, but literally. Now think about how crazy that sounds. A vegan pacifist wanted to break bones in a cage. You cannot make that up.
What ended up happening is I saw a guy in 2004, and the internet is still young at this point, but he had a blog and he was a kettlebell instructor. So he wasn't a professional athlete, but he was a very strong, in shape, flexible guy who cared about his body and about health. His name is Mike Mahler, Mahler. He's actually still around, and I'm pretty sure he's still vegan. And he just gave an example of his diet. And I looked at like his 3-day diet example, and I was like, I could do this. The only thing maybe that I'm doing differently than this is every now and then chicken or fish. So I removed those from my diet. I started eating a little bit more nuts and things like that. And I was like, oh, I feel fine.
Mac's friends thought he was insane. But the thing was, Mac didn't fight because he loved violence. He fought because he loved discipline. He loved the chess match, the control, the technique, the war within. He wasn't a brawler. He wasn't a thug. He was a martial artist in the purest sense. And long before the UFC gave him a contract, Mac was grinding in small shows with names like King of the Cage and Gladiator Challenge, the kind of venues where you get paid $200 and maybe a sandwich. Mac took out Takumi Nakayama, a legit Japanese star, by TKO. He beat Buddy Clinton, Jason Ireland, and defended the KOTC lightweight title 4 times. He even made it to Pride 33 in Japan, fighting Hyoto Mock Sakurai, a legend. Now, he lost that fight, but he was in the arena, on the radar, but still broke, still hustling. So when The Ultimate Fighter 6 came calling, Mac didn't hesitate. This was his shot to finally make fighting a career. But there was one question on everyone's mind. Could a guy who didn't even drink beer survive reality TV and beat guys who had been partying since day one? What happened next would make Dana White call him a future star, but the road there was pure chaos. The Ultimate Fighter Season 6 was a mess. You had drunk wannabes, shirtless brawls in the kitchen, guys pissing on each other's beds, Testosterone Rage was the main character, and in the middle of it all was Mac Danzig, focused, cold, clinical. While others were pounding shots, Mac was pacing the mats alone, visualizing submissions. While others were chasing drama, Mac was chasing the win. In his first fight, he submitted Joe Scarola in round 1 with a triangle choke. Clean, technical, emotionless. Then came John Kalashi, a scrappy underdog. Mac choked him out in the first round too. And when John came back into the bracket after an injury replacement, Mac did it again. First round, rear naked choke. And just like that, he was in the finals. The entire house hated him.
I'd like to spar with Richie just so I can get a hold of him and maybe beat the crap out of him a little bit.
Hey, G! What should I do to fight George? G-Block! I have sex with girls!
Mac, obviously, issues with Hightower. You had issues with Bowman. Dorian Price isn't an easy person to live with in the same house. I've had personal experiences with him. Would you describe The Ultimate Fighter almost like being in prison?
Sure. Like, I guess you could say it was like minimum security prison where you're being exploited at the same time. Your emotions are being exploited and everything that you say. But look, we knew what we were signing up for, but yeah, it was tough.
They thought that he was too serious, too intense, too above it all. But inside the cage, he was surgical. In the finale, he fought Tom Spear, a corn-fed farm boy with ridiculous strength and knockout power. Dana loved Spear. He looked like the next Matt Hughes. But Danzig made him look like a rookie. 2 minutes in, Spear shot for a takedown. Mac sprawled, took the back, slid in the choke, Spear tapped, done. Tough 6 champion. Dana said the words that every fighter wants to hear. This guy is a future star. Now this was the respect that every up-and-coming star dreams of. Mac had won the show with 0 damage taken. 3 first-round finishes, no injuries, no cuts, no drama, just dominance. And behind the scenes, UFC matchmakers were already mapping his rise. They thought they had found their new poster boy, but what they didn't realize was that Mac wasn't interested in being anyone's product. Because he walked into the UFC with momentum and clean hands, but soon the system would start testing his soul. Mac Danzig didn't crash into the UFC like a fireball. He eased in like a technician with a long-term plan. His first official UFC post-fight tough was April 19th, 2008. UFC 83 in Montreal. He dropped the lightweight, just like he promised, faced Canadian prospect Mark Bocek, a BJJ black belt with some top pressure. Mac controlled the fight, took the back, rear naked choke, round 3. The UFC brass loved it. They were already imagining pay-per-view slots. Mac was methodical and marketable. But then the game changed. September 2008, Danzig versus Clay Guida. That is where the grind broke him. Mac came in sharp, landed clean shots early, but Guida never stopped moving. The next 2 rounds, takedowns, shoulder pressure, elbows. Mac didn't break, but he did get smothered. Lost by decision. The machine had shown its teeth. Losses to Josh Neer and Jim Miller followed. The pattern was clear. Tough matchups, tough decisions, momentum gone. No one was calling him the future anymore. Behind the scenes, Mac was still working, training harder, boxing at Wildcard with Justin Fortune. But something inside had shifted. He hated hurting people for a paycheck. He hated that fans forgot your name after one bad night. He hated that the system didn't care if the stoppage was wrong as long as the show went on. He had a daughter now, Nova. Every time he came home bruised and dizzy, he looked at her and thought, is this worth it? He didn't know the answer, but the question kept growing louder. He wasn't done fighting, but the fire was dimming, and what happened next would either reignite it or burn him out completely. Most fighters don't retire, they decay. Mac saw that path and refused it, but he wasn't done just yet. June 10th, UFC 115, Danzig versus Matt Wyman. First round, Wyman jumped on a guillotine. It was tight, but Mac never tapped. He was defending, still breathing. Then the ref stopped it. No tap, no fade, no warning. Mac popped up furious. One of the worst early stoppages in UFC history. The loss stuck. No reversal, no apology. That is when the trust broke. One mistake, and the UFC buried him in the matchmaker fog. Mac wasn't just fighting opponents anymore. He was fighting the system. The decision he made after this controversy shocked the entire MMA world. December 11th, 2010, UFC 124, Danzig versus Joe Stevenson. Another tough winner. Heavy hands, Mac circled, waited, then counter left hook. Crack, lights out. His first KO win in the UFC. Knockout of the night. For a moment, it felt like he was back. But instead of a push, the UFC gave him another Wyman fight. The rematch. October 2011, UFC on Versus 6. 3-round war, no controversy this time. Wyman outpointed him, decision loss. Losses piled up again. Escudero win, then Gomi, Gallard, Lozon. Close fights, brutal fights, but forgettable fights. The kind that chip away at your memory.
Surprised he escaped in the first round?
Yeah, I thought the first one was done. Like, his arm popped really good. Wow. He's wiggling out. I thought he was done for sure. He just toughed it out.
You felt his arm pop?
Oh yeah, his arm popped a couple times. Yeah.
Really? Did you think he didn't recover after that?
I definitely felt like he wasn't using as much. He was throwing a lot of left hooks, which he normally does. But I felt like he wasn't on his right arm as much, his right hand. So, yeah, I definitely.
By the end of 2013, he wasn't broken, but he was worn out. And that is when it clicked. This wasn't about whether he could fight. He still could. He was 34. Not old, not damaged beyond repair, but the damage was adding up. Headaches, memory gaps, foggy days. He didn't need a doctor to tell him what was coming. He started reading. Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy, CTE, the silent killer of combat sports. He saw what happened to other fighters, guys who stayed just one fight too long. Guys who took that last payday. Guys who became shells. Mac wanted no part of that. On March 4th, 2014, he made the quietest announcement in a loud sport. He was done.
Mac Danzig posted a lengthy statement on Tuesday night announcing that at the age of 34, he was walking away from the sport. Danzig noted suffering repeated concussions and is using his retirement as a cautionary tale for younger fighters to know when to pull back in training, feeling it is the sparring sessions that did more damage than his actual fights. Danzig won the 6th season of The Ultimate Fighter in 2007 and had lost his last 3 fights, including his last fight to Joe Lozon in December, and retires with a record of 21-12-1.
No press conference, no tears, no Dana White quote, just a short statement. He was walking away to protect his brain. And just like that, a guy who had fought 35 times, who had been a champion in multiple organizations, who had given the UFC some of the most technical wars in his weight class, was gone. And no one said a word. No tribute, no thanks, just silence. Because when a fighter quits before they become a broken sob story, well, that doesn't sell. But Mac didn't need a send-off. He had his brain, he had his daughter, and he had his dignity. And in MMA, that is rarer than a title belt. But what do you do after you walk away from the only identity you've ever had, when the lights go off and no one's watching? What Mac Danzig did next would prove that he was smarter than everyone thought. Because when most fighters retire, they don't know what to do with themselves. Some chase TV gigs, some try coaching, some go broke, broken, or both. But Mac Danzig, he disappeared completely. He focused on photography, shooting wildlife and landscapes all across the Pacific Northwest.
There's the ocean one down here in Southern California. I like a lot of them for different reasons, but I like the way that very rapidly there's a big swell, and every time the tide would come in, it was crashing against the.
He He started coaching fighters, married fellow fighter Angela Hancock, raised a family in Oregon, opened his own MMA gym, and for the first time in years, he could think clearly, sleep peacefully, speak without stuttering. This wasn't some soft retirement fantasy. Mac had made peace with the fight because he never needed it to define him. He didn't crave headlines, he didn't care about social media clout. He didn't chase validation from fans who disappeared after every loss. In 2017, he took one last fight on the regional scene just for himself. Choked out Joe Condon in the third round, and that was it. Mac proved the biggest win isn't in the cage, because it's not about who leaves with a belt, it's about who leaves with their brain. And in a sport where legends are often the most broken, Mac Danzig is one of the few who walked out whole. No regrets, no lawsuits, no GoFundMe page for medical bills. Just a guy who did things his way and won. That's not just rare, it is almost impossible. But what does his quiet victory mean for the rest of the sport? And for fighters that are still stuck in the grind?
I think, if anything, I think that his statement announcing his retirement is one of the biggest takeaways from his career, where he's really looking at his whole career as an example of something to learn from here, someone who sparred very hard. And we always hear that mentality of guys that when you're competing against the best in the world, of pushing yourself beyond what your body maybe is capable of.
Fortunately for Mac Danzig, his story isn't that original, because if you go out and you talk to a lot of fighters fighting at the highest level or even the lowest level, that's what's killing these guys, is the sparring session as they're getting ready for fight after fight. And George St. Pierre, he's mentioned that because in order to face the cream of the crop in the world of mixed martial arts, or the welterweight division, he has to be in there sparring with the best guys, and it's that type of sparring that causes the damage to the head.
Look at the names around Mac's era. Chris Lieben, Stephan Bonner, Spencer Fisher. Guys who made the UFC millions and left with broken bodies and shattered minds. Some died young, some sued the company, some just disappeared. They gave everything and got used up. Because here's the truth, the UFC doesn't build legends, it harvests bodies. And Mac saw that coming. He saw how fast they forget you, how fast Dana smiles while cutting your check and then ghosting your number. He saw what happens when you ignore the warning signs. And instead of blaming the system later, he outsmarted it early. And what's crazy is that nobody followed his lead. He literally showed the blueprint. Fight smart, save your money, know when to quit. But most fighters kept swinging until the lights go out. They stay for the cheers. Mac left for his daughter. They stayed for legacy. Mac chose memory. They stayed for one more bonus. Mac chose to think clearly at age 50. Mac Danzig didn't just win the Ultimate Fighter. He won at something way bigger, something this sport barely talks about. He won at life. He walked away before they could use him up, before the sport could chew him up and toss him aside like so many others. He still trains, he still teaches, but he also still thinks clearly. He still lives with dignity. And if that's not worth celebrating, what is? Mac Danzig didn't leave a legacy of belts. He left a legacy of clarity. And that might be the one thing that no one can ever take from him. Because in the end, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away.